Where do you have their 2024-2025 season ending? And then we'll get into some offensive MVP before we get into some breakout players and some favorite rookies for this team.
So I have them as one of the final four teams standing. I think they're going to make. I think they're going to make the AFC title game. I really like the improvements they've made on their defense, adding guys like Daniil Hunter and Azeez Al-Shire, adding Stephon Diggs on offense and Joe Mixon. Obviously, I mean, offensively they're as loaded as any team in the league, right? And you've got a front three at receiver like Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs. But the MVP has to be the guy that makes it all go, the guy that turned the franchise around. It's C.J. Stroud. I mean, certain teams you try to get away from the quarterback and you try to find, okay, what's the other reason? Who's the guy that's underappreciated, this and that? But Stroud was just incredible last year, right? And you're talking about a guy who put up the third best overall grade by a rookie quarterback in PFF history. The only two guys better were Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson. I mean, what Stroud did, that's the 13th best overall grade in football. But if you take out, it's really weighted down by three bad games, two against the Ravens and one against the Jets. And actually the Jets game, he got hurt in that game. You take out those three games, he played like a top five quarterback. And he very well could be for the entire season this year. Another year of experience, maybe a little bit better pass protection. Now you add Diggs as a fifth legitimate weapon now when you talk about the three receivers plus Dalton Schultz plus Joe Mixon. I mean, they are just absolutely loaded. That set of 11 guys that they're going to put out there with three receivers out there is as good as any in football, right? And I know Stephon Diggs' second half of last year wasn't great in Buffalo. He started spreading the ball around more, didn't have a 100-yard game after, I think, week 5 or 6. But you add him in with those two guys. We saw what Nico Collins could do as number one. We saw what Tank Dell could do before he got hurt. This is a loaded crew, but Stroud makes it go. Stroud and the decision making. Honestly, there's certain times I watch it, I'm like, man, that looks a lot like Peyton Manning. I'm like, that's just mentally, physically, and honestly, for like a taller, kind of thinner guy, he's got a rifle for an arm man. I mean, he makes 65 yards look easy. I just keep going back to that throw he made the first play of that last game against the Colts, and I'm like, man, that's a cannon for an arm. He's got everything. He turned on the improvisation in that Georgia game, that last game of his college career, and then it just never went away because that was the one thing he really didn't have the rest of his Ohio State career. C.J. Stroud makes this whole thing go. He's the engine of this team, and he's going to lead them to a division title.
Yeah, look, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. The Peyton Manning comp is obviously high, but it's hard to not get so excited about what C.J. Stroud is. And, I remember when I was scouting C.J. Stroud, he started as a true sophomore at Ohio State, and then obviously he started as a true junior as well before he declared, because he couldn't have declared after that sophomore season. I was worried about him. I'm not going to lie. I was worried about how he played under pressure when you have Ohio State, which is basically like 5-star university at this point. You got 5-star receivers, you got a 5-star offensive line, you got a 5-star running back to hand the ball off to. And when things are going well, especially before this now souped up version of the Big Ten, like it was basically Ohio State and Michigan, and that was kind of it in that conference. So most of Ohio State's schedule was easy opponents that they were just more talented than, no matter what. And when Stroud had to play under pressure, especially as a sophomore and most of his junior season, he struggled. Really low passing grades below 50%. And that Georgia game, he had a passing grade, man, under pressure, had to be close to it had to be close to an 80 grade, and maybe it was something in the 70s, but whatever it was extremely impressive how he played against Georgia under pressure. And that was the final game that we saw from him in his college career. And as a draft evaluator, I'm kind of like, what do I do with this? Because you mentioned huge arm, really talented quarterback overall, the best pure passer that we had in that really talented quarterback class, even with, Bryce Young in there, and some people, myself included, was like, yeah, take Bryce Young number 1 overall. The intangibles are too great, whatever. I would have told you that C.J. Stroud is the best pure passer, prolific passer in the class. But how he played under pressure was such a worry to me. And I'm like, if the Georgia game is how he's going to hit the ground running in the NFL, I'm in. I'm all in on C.J. Stroud. He's going to be fantastic. But I had my reservations because it was such a small sample size in one game. It ended up being that was exactly the case. And he was a monster his rookie season because he truly did hit the ground running. I'm so excited to watch him even take another step up this year. with, you mentioned, an incredible receiver room with Nico Collins and a healthy Tank Dell, and now adding Stephon Diggs to it. You've got veterans in the backfield, like Joe Mixon, who's going to lead that group as both a rusher and a receiver as well. So it's an extremely talented group, and CJ has to be my pick for MVP as well, if I didn't say that off the top, because of the high expectations that we have from him. I mean, it's not just team MVP stuff. I mean, for as good as this offense could be, with Bobby Slowick back as the offensive coordinator, you got to think about this Texans team could be good enough where CJ Stroud's getting just overall MVP votes if the season goes the way a lot of people think that it can. So what about defensive MVP? Let's switch to the other side of the ball. Who do you guys the defensive MVP this year?
Some good candidates here, I think, especially in their pass rush. You know, you think about Will Anderson, you think about Danielle Hunter. That's a dynamic duo. And I really thought about picking one of those guys, but I could not ignore the breakout we saw in the second half of last year from Derek Stingley Jr. Man, I mean, now he's ascended into being one of the best corners in football. And to me, the difference in their secondary and the difference in them, just their secondary emerging as a real unit last year, the last 8 games that he played, week 13 through the divisional round game, an 89.4 coverage grade. Trevor, that was the best by an outside corner in the NFL. The only 2 guys that were ahead of him were slot corners, Michael Carter and Mike Hilton. So you're really talking about a guy who, when you get into that argument, now to me, Sauce Gardner is clearly the best corner in football. But when you get into that argument of who's right behind him second, I think Derek Stingley is either in that argument or he's going to be that guy by the end of this year. He's showing us now what he showed us his freshman year at LSU, when as a true freshman he was the best corner in the country during LSU's national title run with Joe Burrow. Then he had injuries. Then he had some time that, wasn't playing a whole lot even early on with the Texans. Last year's rookie year, he was hurt for some of the year and then tried to work his way back. Now he's one of the best corners in football, and he can do anything. He played man, plays zone in D'Amico Ryan's system. He just is one of those guys. We've seen it this preseason as well with the interception against, I believe actually, was it 2 interceptions or just 1 against Daniel Jones and the Giants? Might have been. It might have been one.
I think it was one. I think it was 1, but it should have been 2.
Yeah, it was. It might have been 1 pick and 2 pass breakups. I think it was something like that. But he looks fantastic. When Derek Stingley's healthy, he's got a very good argument as the second best corner in football. I'm going with him on the back end as their defensive MVP.
Listen, as somebody who had Derek Stingley Jr. as overall player number 1 on his 2022 NFL Draft Big Board, I absolutely love what you're saying. And I could not agree with you more here, Dalton. I also think that he is going to be the defensive MVP of this team. And we've got a lot of people who are in the chat as well saying, like, man, there's a lot of different players to choose from, a lot of impactful players here from this team. But I think a lot of it will start with how well Derek Stingley Jr. can truly be that lockdown corner. You mentioned a little bit of his struggles early on in his NFL career. 49.2 coverage grade in 2022, an 85.3 coverage grade in 2023. And this preseason, because of that game that you mentioned against the Giants, it's got a lot of weight here on just 28 snaps, 95.9 preseason game. It just goes to show you how well he is playing. And when you turn on the tape to look at it, man, the tape absolutely matches the high PFF grade. I mean, he is anticipating. He is getting to where the ball is going to be. At times, like, too early. Like, at times, he's almost a little shocked with, like, how well he is reading the play. And I think that all of that is just going to turn into some major plays for them in their defense. And to me, he has to be the defensive MVP. Walt's asking in the chat, yeah, but who's playing cornerback opposite? We'll get there. Walt. I promise. That's coming up in a couple of minutes here. But let's talk about a breakout player. Who do you guys a breakout player here for this team, Dalton?
Look, when we did the North yesterday, we had an FAU legend for the Cincinnati Bengals, right? And I have another one for the Houston Texans. We're going to look at their linebacker position, go with Azeez Al-Shaair, reuniting with D'Amico Ryans from his days in San Francisco. This guy's been a really good run defender since he's been in the league. And 2 years ago, in Ryans' last year as a defensive coordinator for the 49ers, Al-Shaair had his highest career overall grade at 74.4. This guy, for certain, is going to be a good run defender, no question. The question will be in coverage. He could raise his game a little bit by being better in coverage, and now the onus is really going to be on him not only to break out, but to be a really important leader for this team. Christian Harris, who was projected to be their other starting linebacker, is out till at least week 5 with an injury. So now Al-Shaair really has to take on that role as the middle linebacker, captain of the front 7, right? Directing traffic, stopping the run, dropping back in coverage. But I think he can do it. I think his familiarity in this system, his familiarity with D'Amico Ryans is a big asset for this team. They lost Blake Cashman, who had a breakout year last year, but I think they could have a linebacker have a second straight breakout year in Houston.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good call. The addition of him and reuniting him with D'Amico Ryans, I think is I say underrated. I think a lot of people have kind of like mentioned it at this point, but when you talk about linebackers in the grand scheme of things, like we've got people in the chat, understandably so, talking about, Will Anderson Jr., and we just talked about Derek Stingley Jr. Like there's a lot of other guys who I think their names just carry a little bit more notoriety. And Azeez Al-Shaair and what he could be in the middle of that defense, especially the chemistry that he has with D'Amico Ryans and the defense that he wants to run from his time in San Francisco, like that is huge. And I think that's going to be an underrated part of why this defense could be one of the better ones in the NFL. For my breakout player, I'm going to go with an area of the team that if I have any question marks about it, it's the offensive line, particularly the interior offensive line, right? I think that Laramie Tunsil is one of the best offensive tackles in the NFL. They've got Titus Howard, who's playing better at right tackle as well. But the interior offensive line for this group was not great last year. And I'm looking at Kenyon Green, and I'd love to see a bounce back year from Kenyon Green. They drafted him number 15 overall in the 2022 NFL draft. And to me, that was rich. That was a rich pick. I did not think that Kenyon Green was there yet. I didn't think he was a top 15 type of an offensive lineman, especially an interior offensive lineman. Last year as a rookie, well, actually, this was not his rookie year. Last year, 39.3 overall grade on the season. Not great, Dalton. Objectively, not great. And he played 823 snaps, so it's not like it was skewed for like one bad game. I mean, it just was a struggle of a season for him overall. This preseason, he does look better. 84.7 overall grade on 56 snaps. Again, it's a little bit smaller of a sample size, but I am hoping for a breakout bounce back year from Kenyon Green. To me, they really need him on one of the areas of the team that is pivotal. You were talking yesterday about how much offensive line really matters, and obviously I agree with you. Kenyon Green's got to kind of get it figured out here. What about the team's best rookie?
I think it's the guy who's going to play the most. Their second-round pick, Kamari Lassiter. You mentioned before.
There we
somebody
go.
in the chat mentioned before about, well, who's going to play across from Stingley? And they brought in some veterans on one-year deals. I believe they just cut C.J. Henderson. They brought in Jeff Okudah. They drafted Lassiter. Who's the guy? Who's it going to be? Which one of these former high draft picks, is going to be the guy across from Stingley that's not getting targeted 120 times a year because you can't throw at Stingley, right? I think it's Kamari Lassiter, an 87.2 coverage grade at Georgia last season. He was arguably just straight up their best cover man last year, and that was the 8th best mark in the Power 5, right? So I didn't go back and realize like how shut down he was at Georgia. I knew he was good, but like he was lights out. I believe he only gave up 4 plays all season of 15 plus yards, and those 4 plays accounted for like 60% of the total yards he gave up all season. Outside of those 4 plays, he was just lights out for the Bulldogs, man. I think he's going to come in here. He should be the starter right off rip as a second-round pick over some other veteran guys who struggled throughout their career. I think those other guys are depth guys. I think they drafted Lassiter with the idea that he is that guy across from Stingley, and he's going to play the most out of all their rookies. So I think he's certainly the candidate for best rookie.
I agree with you completely. I think that Kamari Lassiter is the guy, and beyond just even some good play that we have seen from him in the preseason, I think it's what we've heard from practice. The practice reports of people who are covering this team, and like D'Amico Ryans himself. Just I was watching a video where he's just praising the competitiveness of Kamari Lassiter. You talk about the background of being able to play for that Georgia Bulldogs defense. I mean, it's just ingrained in these dudes. Being champions, playing as best as you possibly can, giving it your all. I mean, the work ethic, the pride that he plays with, that competitiveness, again, from Kamari Lassiter is something that we saw on tape consistently while he was at Georgia. It's what's allowed him to ascend to that potential starting CB role there. And I think that he really can be a good corner. And it's tough to be a good cornerback as a rookie in the NFL. So I think that Lassiter is in for a big year because of the mentality. I think that's the part. When you look at corners and the guys that struggle as their rookies, oftentimes it's not like a lack of athleticism. I guess sometimes it could be, but it often comes from just being overwhelmed and not being prepared mentally. I'm not worried about that when it comes to Kamari Lassiter. It does not seem like D'Amico Ryans is either. So I also have him as the best rookie on this team. We didn't really mention Will Anderson, which I feel like is a slight to Will Anderson. I mean, we should. He's in for a massive breakout season. I think that he is going to be a fantastic player as well. Also, Sarah in the chat correctly correcting me that my intuition was correct. That grade that I was talking about with Kenyon Green, the 39.3 overall grade for him as a rookie, was indeed him as a rookie. It wasn't last year. he missed all of last year with an injury, unfortunately. So I'm excited to see him back and healthy. But I was like, I thought this was his rookie year, but I didn't put the date down here. Thank you, Sarah, for calling me out there and making sure that we got that on the record and correct.